Welcome back to Massacre on Muriel Court. Let me speak candidly first here about my experience in researching and putting this podcast together. The first thing I want to tell you about is the Leon County Sheriff's Office and how they have been absolutely no help to me whatsoever. Actually, I honestly feel as though they may have, intentionally or not, tried to hinder my research. I requested police reports and all documents pertaining to the Sims case and was shot down immediately, them always claiming that it is an open and active investigation. I asked to speak to the detective assigned to the case. Her name is Pepper Norman. I almost got her on the phone. Once. Almost. I emailed her and she called me back, left me a voicemail with a number to call. When I called the number, it didn't even ring. It went straight to a voicemail box that had not been set up. No one in any official position in Tallahassee has been willing to speak to me about this case. Looking back at what I've learned along this journey, as a lot of this has been written and recorded in real time during my research, some things have really popped out to me. Number one, going way back to 2019 when we interviewed Kyle Jones, the filmmaker who made the documentary 641 Muriel Court, and he mentioned that when he interviewed then State Attorney Willie Meggs about this case, Meggs claimed that he hardly had any memories about the case, yet at the exact same time, he was setting up a task force that Jeremy Mutz was involved in. I'll play that clip for you to refresh your memory.
However, I will tell you one anecdote that didn't make it into the film for a couple reasons, mostly because I was just young and scared. But this is an interesting one. So if you'll remember from the movie, I interviewed Willie Meggs, who was the state attorney at the time.
Right.
And I interviewed him. I remember the dates pretty well. I interviewed Willie Meggs, the state attorney of Florida, on March 12th of 2016. And he told me on March 12th of 2016 that the Sims case is something that he had not thought about in a very, very, very long time. And, I remember this, but I don't know. It's not something I've looked into. That's been closed for a long time, and it was very, very far from his memory. He seemed to remember one journalist pretty well, and every answer I got from him was, that was a long time, I don't know. Any specific questions he just wrote off because it was too long ago to even have any clue about details. I found out later that summer, in an email from one of my sources, that Willie Meggs was very actively involved in the investigation of the Sims case in February and March of 2016, right when he was talking to me. They had arranged a task force to investigate the case, in fact, and to pursue Vernon Fox and Mary Charles LaJoy. They had arranged a task force, and that task force was broken up by Meggs on March 19th of 2016. So 7 days after he spoke to me, saying he didn't remember anything, he broke up a task force about the thing that had been months in the work in the making. Wow. So, if you want to call that pushback, I think that's probably fair to call that pushback.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, and then that kind of...
Yeah, there's definitely politics around this case. Well, there was a lot of politics, and there probably always have been politics around this case that honestly probably could result in a whole other documentary, because...
And that kind of coincides with Jeremy Mutz being fired. From what I've gathered is that he was really hardcore looking into it, and then I know I read something that they were going to let it go, but he wouldn't let it go, and he put together a timeline, he put together all this stuff, and then all of a sudden they fire him.
Yes.
So how does one not recall many details about a case that you are currently setting up a task force to reopen and investigate again? That's new to me. Which brings me to my next topic. The firing of Jeremy Mutz from the state attorney's office in 2016. So back in 2016, in an article by Carl Edders from the Tallahassee Democrat titled "Prosecutor Fired Over Sims Murder Investigation," Mutz claimed he was fired because of ego and politics connected to his continued investigation of the 50-year-old Sims triple murder case. He also said political influence from the Leon County Sheriff Mike Wood may have led to his termination, just as new information surfaced that Mutz believed could have led to an arrest or eliminated potential suspects in this long cold case. I recently spoke to Jeremy Mutz on the phone, and I asked him why he thinks Leon County isn't doing everything possible to solve this case. He replied, "Tallahassee does not like to deal with messy." So there's a few other cases out of Leon County that I want to talk to you about to further prove that point.
It's mostly quiet on Muriel Court, but that wasn't the case in 1966 when Robert Sims, his wife Helen, and young daughter Joy found gagged, stabbed, and shot to death.
Safer politically to leave it alone. Moronic is the word that comes to mind.
He's accusing two top officials of a cover-up.
Standing back there under the banana tree.
Surveillance video of a 1966 FSU football game may be the key to cracking the code in this case gone cold.
You do that.
And while state officials aren't releasing details regarding suspects or persons of interest, it did stress their commitment to finding the Sims killers.
Oh, I think you did it. All of a sudden you became absolutely down, totally obsessed with that. It's a case that we would certainly like to see solved, and investigators are actively working on the case.
The first case we're going to discuss is the case of Granville Baker. On January 19th of 1949, 27-year-old Granville Baker was found dead in his wrecked Jeep with a bullet wound to his head. A coroner's jury found that Baker was killed by a pistol, quote, held by a party or parties unknown. A 21-year-old tavern waitress had been with Baker when his Jeep crashed, but could offer no explanation for the bullet wound that went straight through Baker's head. The bullet was never found, according to then-Sheriff Frank Studemeyer. According to an article from the Harvard Crimson, no author indicated, Florida State Attorney William D. Hopkins said the death of young Baker, whose grandfather amassed a $100 million fortune on Wall Street and gave $5 million for construction of the business school, quote, doesn't look like a murder, end quote. Now, this business school he speaks of is at FSU. And remember that Tallahassee revolves around FSU. The shooting occurred on the vast plantation of Baker's mother, where the Duke and Duchess of Windsor and other celebrities had been entertained. The plantation, located 12 miles north of Tallahassee, is a mecca for hunters. So this case was ruled an accident. The guy had a bullet wound through his head, but the case was ruled an accident. A car accident. Let that sink in for just a second. Next up is the Blue Sink murders. That's what the locals call the murders of 17-year-old Kay Granger and Ann Wood, who were found murdered and their bodies somewhat mutilated in a wooded area in Leon County on October 17, 1967. Blue Sink is a small lake in the Apalachicola National Forest in Leon County. It was once a popular swimming spot and recreation area, but is now closed to the public. Around 8 p.m. that night, Ann picked up Kay in her station wagon to go to a drive-in movie at the Wagon Wheel Drive-In. A clerk at the drive-in remembered the girls coming to the service window sometime after 8 p.m. and buying a bag of potato chips. Around 11 p.m. that evening, the Tallahassee Police Department, or TPD for short, received an anonymous call. It was a man's voice, and he mumbled that there were 2 bodies out at Blue Sink, then hung up. The girls' bodies were found around midnight, and the Leon County Sheriff's Office took the lead on the case. In the news article from the Tallahassee Democrat dated October 18, 1967, it was stated that LCSO had pretty much shut TPD out of the investigation. Assistant Police Chief Robert Mage said that TPD was informed about the findings of the bodies but nothing else. As far as I know, we were not even in on this investigation. It's his, meaning Sheriff Joyce, baby, Mage told the newspaper. Now, a side note, in a memorandum written by Jeremy Mutz on November 20th, 2015, regarding his interview with Sergeant Cooper Donnelly of the Tallahassee Police Department, Donnelly stated that after the Sims murder, they had one roundtable meeting with all agencies, but Bill Joyce ended that and kept TPD out of it afterwards. Joyce was angry. He did not want people to think we had a lunatic on the loose. He made the rule that we, meaning Tallahassee Police Department, had to turn everything we found pertaining to the Sims murder over to LCSO. This is important because this establishes a pattern of LCSO not allowing other agencies to be involved in at least 2 murder cases. The station wagon that Ann was driving was found abandoned the next day. Sheriff Joyce said he believed that the girls left the car and got into another car driven by whoever killed them. Blue Sink was known to be a sort of lover's lane type area, but before the murders of Ann and Kay, Blue Sink had been the scene of several drownings and at least one other murder. These murders happened so close to the first anniversary of the Sims murder, and the victims were beaten, stabbed, and shot, possibly molested, just like Joyce Sims. Locals couldn't help but wonder if they might be connected. When questioned about this, Sheriff Joyce said they were not looking into that as a possibility. And yes, you heard that correctly. They were not looking into that as a possibility. The following day, October 19, 1967, they announced an arrest in the case. Robert Allen, aka Bobby Sanders, 21, who was AWOL from the Army at the time, was taken into custody after he showed up at Madison Memorial Hospital in Madison County with a gunshot wound, which he first claimed was an accident. He told the hospital staff that his roommate was cleaning his gun and had accidentally fired, hitting him in the arm. But his roommate, James Friesner, told police a different story. Sanders dropped Friesner off at a bowling alley in Madison County at 8:15 p.m. Sanders told Friesner that he was driving along the road from Blue Sink when he came upon a car from which he could hear girls screaming for help. He said he turned around and chased the car, and that when the other car paused at a blinking red light, a bottle was thrown and hit his car. Now, this made Sanders angry, so he sped up and cut the car off to stop it. 2 men got out of the car and a fight ensued. One of the men shot Sanders in the left arm, and they got back into the car and sped off. Sanders then used his .22 revolver and shot 5 times at the car as it was speeding away. Sanders described the car as a cream-colored Ford, and he remembered the taillights were round. He wasn't able to get the tag number. Friesner told authorities that this was the story Sanders told him when he picked him up from the bowling alley around 11:45 p.m. that night with a gunshot wound to his arm and blood all over the place, plus a smashed windshield with a bullet hole in the right rear window. There's also blood in the trunk of the car where Sanders claimed that he was rummaging around looking for something to bind the bullet wound with. Now, this is me, Lauren, here, speaking candidly. The description of the car, barring any forensic testing on the blood, sounds like it matches up to Sanders' story. If not, why would Sanders have been shot? And why would the vehicle also have a bullet hole in it? If Sanders killed the girls, did he then shoot up his own car and shoot himself in the arm? And who made the anonymous call to TPD? Let's continue on with the, quote, official story. It turns out, coincidentally maybe, that Sanders used to date Kay Granger. Not sure what or if that fact has any bearing on this double murder case. At this point, police have yet to divulge any information linking Sanders to the murders aside from Sanders' own admission that he was in the area and there was blood in his vehicle. But less than 72 hours after the murders, he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Bobby Sanders entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Sheriff Joyce testified at Sanders' trial that he made an oral confession to the murders. Joyce claimed that in the presence of Deputy Jack Dawkins, aka Big Jack, at the county jail on October 19, 1967, 2 days after the murders, Sanders admitted he picked up the girls and drove them to Blue Sink. Once there, he got teed off when they started to tease him. The details Sanders gave in this confession are very vague, but nonetheless, Sanders apparently admitted that he killed the 2 girls. Sanders admitted to brandishing a gun, a small .22 or .25, and one of the girls made a comment that it was fake. That's when the gun accidentally discharged, and Anne screamed that Kay had been shot. Sanders stated he got excited when the girls started getting on him, and he opened the car door and they all fell out. Joyce said Sanders then asserted the next thing he knew, one body was laying on the ground by the car and the other body was laying in front of the car. He realized his pocket knife was no longer in his pocket. He found the knife along with his wristwatch, jumped in his car, and got out of there. It was not until he went to the car wash and tried to wash the car that he realized he'd been shot. How was he shot? That's my question. Now, Murray Wadsworth, Sanders' defense attorney, objected strongly to the sheriff's testimony. He wanted to know why it had not been recorded, and Joyce said his recording machine at the jail was broken. Wadsworth asked Joyce why he didn't have the statement taken down in shorthand, and Joyce said Sanders talked slowly enough that Big Jack Dawkins could take it in longhand. But Joyce had already told the court that Sanders was crying and talking compulsively. So then Joyce changed his story and said that Sanders eventually calmed down and regained his composure. So what was it? Was he talking compulsively? Was he all charged up, or was he calm and composed? We don't know. On February 11th, 1968, Bobby Sanders was found guilty by reason of insanity. He was sent to the Florida State Hospital in Chattahoochee, where he spent about a year. But did Bobby Sanders really murder Kay Granger and Ann Wood, or was he just the easiest guy to pin it on and get the case closed as quickly as possible? Is there another suspect, and possibly even evidence that's been buried? When Jeremy Mutz interviewed Sergeant Cooper Donnelly, who had been second on the scene in the Sims murder, and also at the scene of the Blue Sink murders, Donnelly told a story of a Florida highway patrolman who pulled over another man near the scene of the Blue Sink murders on that night. This man had a gun and at least one knife, along with blood in the trunk of his car. The FHP officer obviously reported this up his chain of command and was very soon after reassigned to a different part of the state. Okay, moving on to our next case. Early on the morning of December 7, 2012, a freshman at Florida State University reported that she had been raped by a stranger somewhere off campus after a night of drinking at a popular Tallahassee bar called Potbelly's. According to a New York Times article dated April 16, 2014, titled "A Star Player Accused and a Flawed Rape Investigation" by reporter Walt Bogdanich, the young woman gave her account to the police. Several bruises began to appear, indicating recent trauma, and tests would later find semen in her underwear. For nearly a year, the events of that evening remained a well-kept secret until the woman's allegations burst into the open, rolling the university and threatening a prized asset, Jameis Winston, one of the marquee names of college football. 3 weeks after Winston was publicly identified as the suspect, the storm had passed. Scott Angelo, the lead investigator, filed his report, closing the case without interviewing crucial witnesses or getting DNA or phone records from Winston. The local prosecutor announced that he lacked evidence to charge Winston with the rape. The quarterback would go on to win the Heisman Trophy and lead Florida State to the national championship. In his announcement, Prosecutor Willie Meggs, we all know Willie Meggs by now, acknowledged a number of shortcomings in the police investigation. In fact, an examination by the New York Times found that there was virtually no investigation at all, either by the police or the university. But let's be honest, at this point, who's surprised? The police did not follow the obvious leads that would have quickly identified the suspect as well as witnesses, one of whom videotaped part of the sexual encounter. There was video of this rape. After the accuser identified Winston as her assailant, the police did not even attempt to interview him for nearly 2 weeks and never obtained his DNA. The detective handling the case waited 2 months to write his first report and then prematurely suspended his inquiry without informing the accuser. By the time the prosecutors got the case, important evidence had disappeared, including the video of the sexual act. FSU administrators, in apparent violation of federal law, did not promptly investigate either the rape accusations or the witness admission that he had videotaped part of the encounter. Records show that Florida State's athletic department knew about the rape accusation early on, in January 2013, when the assistant athletic director called the police to inquire about the case. Even so, the university did nothing about it, allowing Winston to play the full season without having to answer any questions. After the championship game, in January of 2014, university officials asked Winston to discuss the case, but he declined on the advice of his lawyer. Finally, on November 14th, almost a year later, investigators obtained DNA from Winston, and it did in fact match the DNA found on the victim. But on December 5th, 2013, Willie Meggs decided the evidence was not sufficient to prosecute Winston. Welcome back. I've got one more case for you here. Daniel Eric Markle was a Canadian-born attorney and law professor. He earned his Juris Doctorate degree from Harvard University in 2001, and after working briefly as a law clerk and junior associate at a law firm, he joined the faculty of Florida State University in 2005. Markle was shot in the garage of his home in Tallahassee, Florida, shortly before 11 a.m. on July 18, 2014. He died early the next day. The Tallahassee Police Department announced that Markle was the intended victim and deemed his death a murder. On May 26th, almost 2 years later, a suspect, Sigfrido Garcia, age 34, of Miami Beach, was arrested for first-degree murder based on a warrant issued by a Leon County judge. Tallahassee police would not release further details, but told reporters that the killing was being investigated as a murder for hire, and sources said that they expected more arrests in the case. A few days later, a judge in Leon County ordered the probable cause affidavit behind the arrest unsealed. The affidavit revealed investigators' belief that Garcia and another man named Luis Rivera, age 33, had traveled from the Miami area to commit the crime. The affidavit further outlined investigators' theory of the case that Markle's death was a contract killing in which Charlie Adelson, the brother of Markle's ex-wife Wendy Adelson, and Donna Adelson, Charlie and Wendy's mother, had used a woman named Catherine Magbanua as a go-between to hire Sigfrido Garcia and Luis Rivera for the killing. According to the affidavit, the motive was the desire for the family of Wendy Adelson to allow her to relocate to the Miami area with her children. Charlie Adelson was in some sort of personal relationship with Catherine Magbanua. Magbanua received a large amount of money from the Adelsons following the killing. She also was the first call Garcia dialed after Markle was murdered, and that Charlie and Donna Adelson disliked Markle. On October 1st, 2016, police arrested Catherine Magbanua. She too was charged with murder. October 4th, 2016, Luis Rivera pled guilty to the charge of murder as part of a plea bargain in which he was sentenced to 19 years in prison, which would run concurrently with another sentence he was already serving. In his confession, Rivera claimed that Sigfrido Garcia had recruited Rivera to take part in the killing of Markle and that Catherine Magbanua was the woman in the middle doing everything. Rivera also claimed that he did not know the names of the people who hired Garcia and Magbanua, but that the reason for the killing was, quote, because the lady wants her 2 kids back. She wants full custody of the kids. The Adelsons denied any involvement. The trials for Catherine Magbanua and Sigfrido Garcia were combined and took place in October of 2019. In the trial, prosecutors claimed that Charlie Adelson had arranged to pay Magbanua, Rivera, and Garcia $100,000 to murder Markle so that Wendy Adelson could get full custody of her children. On October 11th of that year, a jury found Sigfrido Garcia guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy in the 2014 killing. On October 15th, the jury sentenced Garcia to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, plus 30 years for conspiracy. Circuit Court Judge Robert Wheeler sentenced Catherine Magbanua to life in prison, plus 2 additional 30-year sentences to run consecutively for her role in the murder. Charlie Adelson was finally arrested on April 21st of 2022 and was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder. Wendy and Donna Adelson were also named as co-conspirators. Why did it take 8 years to arrest the Adelsons? So going all the way back to 1949, it appears as if my pal Jeremy Mutz is spot on in his assessment. Tallahassee does not like to deal with messy. They appear to not want to put in the work and effort to find the truth and achieve justice. Why? It's really hard to say. It could be that FSU is calling the shots, as many of these cases have ties to the school. Or it could just be plain laziness on the part of the investigators or the prosecutors. It could be ego. It could be political. Personally, I think it's probably a little bit of all of the above. So please join me next week, and we will continue exploring the Sims murders. Massacre on Muriel Court is researched, written, and produced by me, Lauren Samples. If you'd like to support the show, please consider joining our Palmahawk Media Patreon page at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media. On Patreon, you'll receive early and ad-free episodes of this show and our sister show, Paradise After Dark, along with exclusive content for both shows. Thanks for listening.
It's mostly quiet on Muriel Court, but that wasn't the case in 1966 when Robert Sims, his wife Helen, and young daughter Joy found gagged, stabbed, and shot to death.
Safer politically to leave it alone. Moronic is the word that comes to mind.
He's accusing 2 top officials of a cover-up.
Standing back there under the banana trees.
Surveillance video of a 1966 FSU football game may be the key to cracking the code in this case gone cold.
You do that.
And while state officials aren't releasing details regarding suspects or persons of interest, they did stress their commitment to finding the Sims killers.
Oh, I think you did it. All of a sudden you became absolutely down, totally obsessed with that. It's a case that we would certainly like to see solved, and investigators are actively working on the case.